It is indeed a privilege to be with you this morning. Someone asked me once about whether I missed serving in uniform. And I told them that, of course, you miss the people and the relationships that you develop. I do not miss the craziness of official Washington, D.C., but I miss my time in Africa, and I miss my time with you. The complexity, the diversity of the challenges across the African continent are well known to you, but for me it was all new, and it was a very exciting time and a very intellectually stimulating time to have the opportunity to serve and to see so many of you across the continent of Africa. I would begin by thanking the Africa Center for the invitation to speak with you this morning. The Africa Center, in my view, is being quite effective in meeting the demands of an ever-changing relationship between the United States and each of the African nations with whom we have engagement. I also learned in traveling across Africa that when you are confronted with a distinguished group such as this, with so many ambassadors, generals, admirals, and so many others, that it is wiser simply to say, all protocol observed. Mostly, though, allow me to thank each of you for choosing to participate in this seminar, and thanks to each of your countries for choosing to send you here. It is, in my experience, opportunities such as this leadership seminar which afford us the opportunities to better understand one another and to develop and build the relationships and partnerships which will prove beneficial deep into the future. In preparing for this morning's session, the Center asked me to focus on three primary questions. First, how do you define strategic leadership in an African context? Second, what key principles or characteristics define a successful and effective security sector leader, both civilian and uniformed? And the third question, how can you, the seminar participants, overcome the practical challenges that you face each day in exercising effective leadership? Now, the reality is we could spend many hours discussing each one of those questions. So what I hope to do today is offer you some insights from my experience, and then we will hopefully have plenty of time for us to discuss this together with our gifted moderator. So if you'll allow me to begin, sometimes I believe it's helpful to begin with some definitions so that we have a common start point. If you were to go to Google or Bing or some other internet search engine and type in definition of strategic leadership, the results that you will get mostly address leadership in the context of business terms. And while we aren't exclusively business people, that actually is not a bad place to start. For example, the Strategic Leadership Institute, which is based in South Africa, on its website it says, a strategic style of leadership is to motivate workers to take the initiative to improve their productivity. It goes on to say, strategy involves thinking and planning. Leadership inspires. That's an important word. Leadership inspires others to take appropriate action. On a different website, a management website, it says strategic leadership refers to a manager's potential to express a strategic vision for the organization and to motivate and persuade others to acquire that vision. I think the key word there to me is express, meaning you must be able to, the strategic leader must be able to effectively communicate. And lastly, because I was a soldier, here's the Army's view from the Army's publication about leader development. It says leadership is the process of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and to improve the organization. That also is, I think, an important notion, that at the strategic level, you do have a dual responsibility, not only to accomplish the tasks which you have been assigned, but to make your organization better in the future. From these and many other sources, perhaps we can identify a few common characteristics of successful strategic leadership. I would begin with vision, meaning where do you see your organization being in the future? What do you want others to think about your organization? For those in the security sector, this could include ideas such as, for example, I would like our security forces to be trusted and respected by the government and by the people. Or, I want us to be seen by our own people and by our neighbors as a force for good. Or perhaps thirdly, our police and military forces should be organizations that attract and retain the very best and brightest of our citizens. These are some small examples of the kinds of things that you might articulate in the vision that you have for your organization. But that's not enough. Once you have developed that vision, what do you do with it? First, I would say you have to communicate that vision. And I think you must communicate that vision to multiple audiences. You must, of course, communicate internally. I would say that's part of the providing purpose within your own organization. In my own experience, communicating internally to your organization requires repetition, conveying a sense of commitment and continuity. But more so, you must recognize that during your time as a strategic leader, the organization under you is constantly changing. New people come and go all the time. So you must repeat your message often enough to ensure that everyone in the organization understands your vision. In addition to communicating internally, the strategic leader must determine which external audiences must be addressed. In a military unit, this is relatively easy to decide. You must communicate to your higher headquarters and also to those units with whom you operate, perhaps to include police or border security and the gendarmerie. The trickiest part of communicating is often with the media. As a strategic leader, the media is often your primary means of communicating with the citizens that you serve. Now, to be honest, there is always some risk in communicating with the media, and perhaps we can have some conversation about that in the question and answer period. I would tell you from my personal example of traveling about in Africa and interactions with African media, I found a very wide range of capabilities. Some reporters were quite good and responsible, while others, mostly in nations where there had not been a strong tradition of freedom of the press, those reporters were less accurate and less responsible. You have to know the nature of the media with whom you are interacting. So if you've developed your strategic vision, and you've communicated it effectively internally and externally. Is that sufficient? In my view, it is not. You still have two major steps to follow. After developing your vision and communicating it, you, as a strategic leader, must now take and implement actions or take active measures to implement your plan. How do you do that? Well, it will vary depending on your personal leadership style. It will vary depending on how much time do you have, the size of the organization that you lead, and the talent of the team that you build or that you will build in the future. But in my view, amongst all these variables, there is one constant. And that is, unlike at the tactical or at the retail level, if you will, at the strategic level where you now serve, you simply cannot do everything yourself. Those who try to do so almost invariably fail as strategic leaders. Overly centralizing control or decision-making simply does not allow your organization to operate with the speed and agility that is required in today's security environment. And in the security world, over-centralizing decision-making cedes initiative and momentum to our adversaries. Think for a moment how Al-Qaeda or ISIL operate. Now, I don't mean in any way to approve of what they do. I don't, nor do you. But what they do, but how they operate is from a clear organizational vision. Tactical or operational decisions are made at a very local level, operating within a broad intent. Again, to use an American military term, some of these local terrorist cells operate within a broad understanding of commander's intent. In our case, the strategic leader describes the vision, communicates it, and then establishes the mechanisms by which the vision will be achieved. To again use a U.S. military term, you are designing the campaign plan, the strategy, if you will, and that strategy is important for all to understand. That strategy is built on three components. First, the ends. The vision. What is it that you intend to achieve? Those are the ends of the strategy. Second are the ways. In other words, how are you going to go about achieving the objective or achieving your vision? And then thirdly, the means, meaning the resources that are required to implement the plan. So the strategy has those three components: ends, ways, and means. And they must all three be considered in developing the strategy. In articulating the strategy, the leader identifies interim objectives or milestones. She or he designates responsibilities for subordinate leaders, described more in terms of outcomes than in terms of specific actions. In other words, instead of the strategic leader saying, "Do things this way," the strategic leader says, "These are the things I need you to accomplish." And that allows the subordinate leader to apply his or her own initiative to accomplish the task. But even a well-crafted strategy or campaign plan is not enough, in my view. There remains one more difficult task for the strategic leader. That is the task of assessment. How do you know that the actions that you and your organization are taking are, in fact, achieving the desired end state? In my time as a senior leader in the U.S. military, this has been perhaps the most difficult task at strategic leadership. In the U.S. military, I suspect, like yours, we are very, very good at measuring the level of effort. We can tell you quite precisely how much ammunition did we use, how many bombs were dropped, how much fuel did we use. In a humanitarian crisis, how many local people did we feed, how many gallons of water were pumped, how many children did a medical team treat in Central Africa. While knowing these facts is indeed important, they do not answer the question, are we achieving our intended end state? Strategic assessment is hard business. It is, in my view, the strategic leader's business. And in my experience, the best assessments are a combination of objective, that is, measurable indicators, such as we just discussed, combined with subjective measures, opinions, thoughts, feelings. How do you gather such subjective information? It's widely dependent upon the situation in which you find yourself operating. Feedback from surveys, discussions with local officials, as well as others, non-governmental organizations, or other civil society leaders can help you understand the effects that you are achieving. So can the media. And never discount your own personal assessment. As a strategic leader, you were chosen because of your character, your instincts, and your sound judgment. Use those wisely, but also always keep an ear open to the dissenting opinions that you will hear. All of that, to me, says that the assessment is absolutely critical. It allows you to know whether or not you are progressing in the proper direction toward achieving the intended end state or vision. I would offer two specific suggestions with regard to assessment. First, you must make the development of the assessment plan at the same time that you are developing the campaign plan. Whoever it is that is going to conduct your assessment must be embedded in the planning process so they understand all that is going on. And secondly, I would encourage you to choose someone who you trust to lead your assessment effort. In my opinion and experience, it cannot be the chief of staff or the chief of operations. Instead, it must be someone who can advise you that perhaps things are not going as well as your staff might be telling you. So there, in summary, are my thoughts about strategic leadership. First, develop your vision. Where do you want your organization to go? Secondly, communicate that vision with all affected groups internally and externally. Third, develop your plan or your strategy, the ends, the ways, the means. And fourth, develop an effective assessment process that will inform you as to how you are progressing toward achieving your intended end states. Now, strategic leadership, of course, entails much more than just these four steps. It involves team building and leader and coalition building. It requires developing relationships, developing subordinate leaders. It entails succession planning. Who are the next cohort of your leaders? You must innovatively apply technology, and obviously you must manage resources effectively, and much, much more. I would, though, say that strategic leadership is always about learning. You're constantly seeking new and more effective ways to help your organization improve its performance. This was noted, I think, very succinctly by President Mandela, who said, "Be a lifelong student. Read as many books as you can." I'll offer three. Thanks, Dr. So I would offer three books for you to consider. The first is a book simply called Leadership by Elizabeth Samet, S-A-M-E-T. It is a collection of essential writings of some of the world's greatest thinkers. What I like about this book is that you can look for a particular subject or a particular writer, and there's perhaps a few pages relevant to that subject. So you don't have to read the whole book all at once. Secondly, I would commend to you a book entitled A Passion for Leadership by former U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. Well known to many of you, certainly in the U.S. government, a highly respected senior leader, and his perspectives are useful. I have always found useful. And lastly, you might think this one a bit odd for military and security professionals, but I would commend to you the Harvard Business Review. It's a business-focused publication, but the insights that are offered, I think, apply equally to those who serve in government positions. If nothing else, it offers you insights into the latest thinking about strategic leadership development across the globe. So those three and many, many others, I think, are worth reading. Finally, a word about mentorship. I suspect most, if not all of you, have, like me, benefited by having someone or several people serve as mentors for you throughout your careers. A mentor is someone to whom you turn for guidance, for advice, for insights. And mentorship is a relationship that is entered into voluntarily by both parties. In my view, mentorship cannot be dictated. First, I encourage you to sustain those mentoring relationships that have helped you to this point. In fact, it is my judgment that the more senior you become, the more critical it is that you have a mentor or a number of mentors to help you address the increasingly difficult decisions that you must make. And I believe you should be mentoring others. In each of your organizations, you know bright young leaders in whom you see great potential. Coach them, advise them, mentor them. Help them be the next great generation of leaders in your country. When, at the end of your careers, as I am at the end of mine, you will reflect mostly upon the leaders you helped develop. And it is indeed an immense sense of pride to see those that you developed become the great leaders that our nations so desperately need. So with that, again, thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts with you, and I look forward now to our discussion. Thank you.